These are unprecedented times. I would be saying that independent of pandemics and protests and international unrest and catastrophic climate change. But speaking both globally and locally about our industry, these are unprecedented times because geospatial is also changing. It's also complex. Technology is advancing at an incredible rate, which is lucky because it seems that the problems we are being asked to solve are also becoming exponentially more complex. Indeed, each of the global complexities outlined above is being monitored by tools which are geographic because global problems are intrinsically geographic, and we must be up to the task. Hi, I'm Will Cadell. I run a company called SparkGeo, where we provide geospatial advice to technology companies, governments, and nonprofits. I want to talk to you today about strategic thinking and why it should be applied to the geospatial community of practice. We need to think strategically because the problems we face are too complex to address without a clear approach. Having a strategy does not remove the complexity of our terrain, but being strategic allows us to use a framework to travel through that more complex terrain. At SparkGeo, this is how we think about geospatial. Where humans move and landscapes change, there is value, and that is geospatial. That's how we think about opportunity. That's how we think about the market we operate in. This is the essence of what I think some people miss in our community. It's quite simple, really. Our planet is dynamic, and understanding and measuring that dynamism at various different scales and dimensions is what our community really does. So if we extrapolate out algorithms at one scale or in one market, we can likely use them at a different scale in a different market. Being strategic is about being able to think of those various different scales at the same time. It's about being able to hold opposing ideas in your mind at the same time for evaluation. And it's about being able to see an objective, understanding your available tools and resources, and then pragmatically committing to a particular approach. Firstly, 3 thoughts on strategy and strategic thinking. I am always deeply envious of people who seem to always know what they're doing and which way they're pointing. So you might already have a strategy. You might always build geospatial software using Python. You might only ever do cartography about ski resorts because that's all you ever want to do and you don't want to touch anything else, and that's what you know. Strategy is like doing something with purpose. It's knowing why. I sometimes think about it like a North Star because it's kind of a navigational aid. You don't necessarily need to be going north, but once you know where north is, the rest of the cardinal points fall into place. That doesn't mean you're not going to move around features as you move towards your North Star. You've got to navigate around lakes, or swamps, or in the business world, you've got to figure out cash flow and you've got to figure out people and business. So all that kind of stuff's got to be taken care of, but you have an idea of where you're pointing. So you can make a short-term deviation for a long-term target. Strategy is useful in day-to-day life. It's a good toolkit for decision-making. It's a framework, gives you an intrinsic approach and kind of this idea of a common understanding if there's more than one of you working on a particular thing. You have this common understanding around how you're going to do something. So consider the difference between a strategy and a tactic. Often people get these things mixed up. Strategy can also have scale through an organization. So what might be What might be a tactic at a top level might end up being a strategy at a lower level in an organization. And let's think about how organizations can be strategic and can be tactical. If you have organization A, they are a cloud company, and organization B just uses the cloud for occasional things. Cloud company, organization A, has no servers, they have deep cloud expertise throughout the organization, they have no need for discussion on deployment methods because they already know how they're going to do it, and they have deep comfort in that approach. Organization B has a mixed storage and application environments because they're just using the cloud this one time, and they have a need for discussion on deployment because they don't really know what they're doing, and they have a need to explain themselves to their executive. They need to justify the decision that they're making. In fact, if they don't have a strategy for deployment, they'll need to justify every single decision that they're making, or there'll be an abdication of responsibility by the executive for the deployment, and that could be even more dangerous. And this is feeling of experimentation. In organization A, the outcomes are a deep knowledge of the cloud and an ability to accelerate through a whole bunch of the execution simply because you know what you're doing from the beginning. There's no questions, so decision making. And it's easy to say no to alternative technologies or alternative methods because that's just not the way you do it. If you're in organization B, projects are slowed by decision making. You've got to make the same decisions in every single project. There's a need for executive review. There's a need for retrospective evaluation. So you can see that organization A, when faced with a particular project, is going to move a lot faster than organization B, simply because they have a strategy for how they do things. They just don't have to discuss a lot of it. So what does strategic thinking look like? It's being able to think at various different scales simultaneously. So you need to be able to think what the cloud would look like at a corporate level, the top down. What does it mean? What is our total cost of ownership associated with the cloud? But at the bottom, how many DevOps staff do we need? And do we have the ability for them to actually do real things on the cloud? Do we have a nice big fat pipe? Do we have connections? Do we have that stuff? Do we have to move a lot of data somewhere? Are there problems? So being able to think on a very strategic level, and then being able to think how that strategy is going to be applied, that is critical for a strategic organization. And then holding opposing ideas simultaneously. So we have this strategy, but you need to be testing that strategy. You need to ensure that that strategy is pointing in the right direction. So therefore, you need to hold opposing strategies, where you need to uphold the whole opposing ideas in your mind as well, to constantly investigate whether what you're doing is an appropriate thing to be doing. And you're also constantly identifying and understanding resources that are available to you. It is a strategic advantage to have a good understanding of the resources which are available to you, i.e., the cloud is constantly evolving. Technology in general is constantly evolving. Our understanding and our ability to index imagery is constantly evolving. There are bazillions of sensors in the sky. There are bazillions of sensors in everyone's pockets. There's a whole bunch of data out there. Understanding that data and understanding how that data joins together is a strategic advantage. So what's this? This is a strategic spin cycle, is what I call it. In essence, developing a strategy is reflective and it should be iterative. It's going to change over time. You need to navigate around those features. You need to learn how to execute. This is a rather obvious feedback diagram. What do we need to do? Why are we doing that? Is that the best way to do it? Did it work? And we just go round and round and round. If you continually do that, then you can continually refine your strategy. It's a series of experiments in navigation and reflections. You can make mistakes and you can correct your direction if you reflect on what you're doing. You should never really reach your North Star. I can't reach my North Star. I ain't got a rocket, and no one on this planet's got a rocket big enough to get to the North Star. However, doesn't mean the North Star is not a useful thing. If you manage to actually reach your strategy, then you've probably set a goal, not a strategy. You execute a strategy to achieve a goal. These are two different things. Reflection allows us to consider this idea, critical idea of velocity instead of speed. Speed in business is a useless metric. So next time someone says, yeah, my company goes really fast, you could think to yourself, that's cool, you can go fast, but what direction are you going in? Is it the right direction? Is it the direction you want to go in? Do you know what direction you're going in? And if everyone says, yeah, I'm moving forward, my first question to ask them is, that's great, but which way is forward? So velocity is powerful if you know where you want to go. So let's think about that a little bit more. This is my velocity speed diagram. If you notice, the blue line is the line that most people take. Velocity is where we are moving towards our North Star. But if you notice that blue line, very rarely is it actually going the same direction as the velocity line towards the North Star. And we would expect that our biggest fluctuations in that speed, or in the distance that the speed line is from the velocity line, will be when you start to first develop your strategy. You'll get it wrong, and then you'll get it right, and they'll be a bit wrong, and they'll get a bit righter, and a bit righter, and a bit righter, until ideally you're pretty close to the line of velocity, and you kind of know how to execute on your strategy. Okay, what is modern geospatial? Let's avoid religious debates and consider activities and how they're related. What is it that you do? What do others do, and why? Do open and proprietary philosophies preclude each other? Can you have open source technology and proprietary technology in the same solution? Do they preclude each other? No, they do not. Does the end user actually care about our software philosophy? Again, no. They want a service, and they're typically willing to pay for that service. So let's make that service happen. More than anything, though, we should be thinking deeply about our customers and about what they actually need, and whether that they need the thing that we think that they need, or indeed whether they need the thing that we would like them to need. Only after we consider a problem, the actual customer problem, should we consider technology. Ideas must be more powerful than software. They always win. The power of open source is community and in its accounting. Every line of proprietary code is maintained by its creator, and that's a liability, overtly a liability. Every line of open source code is maintained by a community, therefore it's an investment. It sits on the other side of a balance book. Strategically, there's a balance between open and proprietary technology, and that balance is a powerful brew. If you have community for support for infrastructural technology, and then intellectual property protection for domain-specific expertise, you're able to stand on the shoulders of giants much more effectively. Open geospatial technology is foundational, it's infrastructural. Technologies like GDAL. We all stand on the shoulders of GDAL and PROJ, and EPSG codes. Broad funding for those things is necessary, but none of that precludes the fact that you can sell something proprietary on top of it. And that model allows smaller organizations to operate in a very meaningful way. That is powerful. Okay. With apologies to Monsieur Magritte, this is not a geospatial cloud. So I make the argument that there is no real geospatial cloud. What makes a cloud product? Well, in my mind, it's scale. On-demand pricing enables scale. If pricing is wrong, then the product might be on the cloud, but it's not a cloud product unless you can genuinely access it in an on-demand manner. If you can genuinely achieve some level of infinite scale. Obviously, We don't really think about infinite compute or infinite scale, but we do not want to be confined. There are numerous tuned clouds. There's financial clouds, there's health clouds, there's IoT clouds, there's all sorts of clouds. But there is no geospatial cloud. Whether it's a pricing barrier or whether it's a functionality barrier, it's just not there. Technologies, companies often use open source code, often to retain IP. Here's a good story. SparkGeo, we spend a lot of time working with the tech sector. I would go down to San Francisco, I walk into an office, and we have a chat about geospatial, about how it can be leveraged inside a particular business, how it can be leveraged inside a particular environment. And I say, you know what? There are proprietary solutions to this. We can think about implementing software architecture and enterprise software architecture. We can do all this stuff. And they say, no, well, hold on. We don't want to buy software. We want to own all the IP. That's the nature. We want to own the IP so we can subsequently sell the company and build value off that. That's their value proposition. They've got a bunch of venture funding to allow them to grow an organization. However, so we rush off and we build the thing, we stick it on the OpenStack, and we take that open code with the proprietary IP on top, and we throw it onto a proprietary cloud. And so think about that. Think about that model. The proprietary cloud is, it's this rabbit hole of increasing functionality. The separation between development and infrastructure is getting fuzzier and fuzzier. There are more and more spatial options in cloud environments. There's more and more proprietary cloud technology creeping up the value chain of that startup's IP, if you like. So if there was a scalable, on-demand cloud with data storage and mapping and all those nice pieces just built in, it wouldn't take much of a stretch to be the choice of the tech sector. However, it's also not much of a stretch for one of the massive cloud providers just to slide in there and be that option. That's a powerful brew. That's an interesting place to be doing business because those projects are enormous. Here's an interesting story. How many people are geospatial people? And how many people are not geospatial people? Think of this in terms of a Venn diagram. I think my scale is well off here. I think the red dot should be smaller, and I think the blue dot should be bigger. I think there's way more people than there are geospatial people. That's not a hard thing for us to be thinking about. So when I say that geospatial people excel at building geospatial things for other geospatial people, it means that we have two different oceans that we're operating in. Because perspective matters. We get to choose the ocean in which we want to journey. We can choose the red ocean, where there is copious competition and well understood business models, but hard to attack markets. Yeah, that's that little geospatial people ocean that we all understand because we live it. But then there's the blue ocean here. The blue ocean is the one that's almost empty of competition. Additionally, in our case, the blue ocean is potentially much larger. I wouldn't say potentially anymore. I am utterly convinced that the blue ocean is enormous. There are many more non-geospatial people than there are geospatial people. Thus, there must be more opportunity. However, potentially, those geospatial solutions that we create for those normal people might not have a map. They might be a chart. They might be a graph. They might be a report. They might have an intrinsically geospatial element, but that geospatial element might not be intrinsically presented as a map. And that, to a lot of people in our immediate community, is troubling and scary, but we should embrace it, because that doesn't mean there isn't a need for GIS people or geospatial people or people who understand geography. It just means we need to think about user interface. We need to think about putting the same thing in a different pizza box. That's not a big problem for us to solve. Let's think about two things. Let's think about upstream geospatial. Let's think about downstream geospatial. What on earth do I mean by that? I was lucky enough to go on a trade mission to the UK immediately before coronavirus, and they have this fascinating nomenclature around the use of geospatial technology. Upstream guys, they create and distribute data. Might be a satellite, might be an airplane, might be drone, cell phone, GPS, who knows. It's a way of accruing or building a data set that says a thing. Imagery, measurement, location, who knows, signal reception, RF, who knows. And then downstream, geospatial, talk to clients. They talk to customers. They build things which are consumed. And I think this nomenclature is really interesting. It's like overtly oil and gassy, but it's a really interesting way of thinking about our markets, and one that's worthwhile us pursuing. So if we dig into this a little bit, we can end up with some interesting assessments. Okay, so we have this data creation company, and they are surrounded by different customers asking them about different things. Here's the thing about geo. Nothing is straightforward. If you are an imagery company and you create an image of a place every single day, Planet famously has been doing this, but other organizations are attempting to do the same thing. It is a fascinating value prop. It's super hard to consume. I've lived the GIS dream. I know that if someone sends me an image of a particular place every single day, what I'm actually receiving is a problem to solve every single day. So I'm going to push back and say, I actually kind of want to know this thing in particular about my problem set. I want to know how many trees there are in this picture. I want to know how big the fire burn is in this picture. I actually don't necessarily want to know something about this every day. I just want to know when something has changed. Has it changed? Can you tell me it's changed? But every single customer and every single vertical, so think about verticals here in terms of colors. Some of them are similar to each other, some of them are different. Every single customer, every single vertical is asking for something slightly different. They're almost always asking for some kind of derivative product. So often we have the data creator who are creating excellent, useful data products, but the actual customers don't want the image, or they don't want that particular product. They want a derivative, which is directly relevant to their particular business. That's quite confusing. Let's think about that a little bit more deeply. What happens if instead of selling to a series of customers and trying to understand every single market, what happens if that upstream company started thinking more deeply about engaging with particular partners and letting those partners deeply understand their own markets? So those partners can enrich data, or those partners can build those vertically specific derivative data products. That becomes a very powerful model. It becomes very compelling. And it also means that the upstream data company only has to engage with a handful of partners. They can, if they want to, think about it like a venture portfolio. They could have a couple of partners who are in the same market vertical, and they could, they could encourage some level of competition, or they could commit sector exclusivity to particular partners for a cost. So there's lots of value in this model. There's also a great deal of trust in this model. So that's the real reason that this hasn't necessarily been adopted in as holistic a manner as it could have been, because we have to think deeply about trust. And trust is not a straightforward thing necessarily to engender. Once you've built it, this is an incredibly powerful model, and one that allows the upstream data creation company to deeply focus on what they're good at, which is creating high quality data products, and then allows the downstream partners to dial in on exactly what their individual market vertical needs. So you could have the oil and gas partner, you could have the defense partner, you could have the big ag partner, you could have all these different partners, but you let them deal with the variability in their markets, and you, as the upstream portfolio data creation company, get to differentiate yourself across various different markets, but only with a handful of partners to manage, and not having to deal with the use case associated with every single customer within a wide variety of markets. But the interesting thing about downstream geospatial is this idea of activities. We do the same algorithmic activities over and over again. This is what we learned in SparkGeo. It's absolutely fascinating, because we used to do, or personally, I used to do a ton of stuff in forestry. I did, back in the day, I did government science, I did municipal stuff back in Scotland, then I came over here to Canada, and I spent 5 years in the forestry sector doing a whole bunch of analysis. Lots of point and polygon analysis, trees in polygons, drawing polygons around blocks of trees, that kind of stuff. And then finding out different attributes of those trees and resource analysis stuff and all the rest of it. And then we thought, hey, we should put maps on the internet. Wouldn't that be a good idea? So we put maps on the internet, and in doing so, realized that we're using exactly the same algorithms there that we were using in the forest sector. So this is really interesting. So if you think about you as a downstream geospatial company, you have this point and polygon, you're doing the same algorithmic thing all over, over and over again, same algorithmic thing. However, every single market, every single customer here is asking for a different thing. So they call it something different. And that's a really useful thing for us to be thinking about. So they might be calling it forest resource analysis, someone else might call it retail location analysis, someone else might call it threat capability modeling, someone else might call it precision big agricultural analysis. It's still the same algorithm, because geospatial is a deeply horizontal activity. If we organize those markets, we can see that the same activity is being undertaken in each of these different markets, but being delivered in a different way. All we're doing is changing the pizza box. SparkGeo, we used to do, or I used to in the forest sector, used to do GIS, sort of hand bombing stuff, GUIs, a little bit of automation work, various different geospatial operations on a one-off process, on a one-off basis for various different clients. All we do now in SparkGeo is wrap that stuff up into repeatable software products. So it's the same algorithm, it's just being taken out of the GIS and being put into a blob of software, and put into a highly repeatable piece of Python or a highly repeatable piece of JavaScript. Same thing, it's still geospatial. Geospatial is an intrinsically horizontal activity. So if you are looking around for new and interesting markets, it's definitely worth thinking about the activities that we do and the activities that other people do. I don't consider geospatial to be an industry, in the same way that I don't really consider relational databases to be an industry, because it's a very horizontal activity. I do consider GIS to be an industry, but I consider geospatial to be a community of practice. So the same member of that community of practice might be writing a piece of code in Python and sticking it in some kind of cloud-based pipeline to be run over and over and over again for every single device that plugs into a particular service. But that thing could also be done equally as well in a piece of desktop GIS. And that is interesting and is definitely worth thinking about when we explore our, as I've called it, an embarrassment of verticals. And it's an embarrassment of wealth, because we can really apply our expertise to almost any industry. We've just got to decide how we want to apply that expertise. And we've got to decide if our expertise is packaged in the most appropriate way. So I really like this idea of building an appropriate delivery mechanism, thinking about the pizza box for what it is that you're good at, because that pizza box is really the specific piece of market verticality that will separate you from somebody else. Building a better pizza box might not be a better pizza. It could be exactly the same pizza. It's a point and polygon analysis. It's a very simple piece of geographic algorithm. But presenting that in the most efficient manner and getting it to someone while it's still hot, getting it to someone so it's not destroyed, getting it to someone so it's not wet, getting it to someone so it's the highest quality product is enormously valuable. And that's a piece of the market that's often forgotten about. And if you're looking for new markets, that's a piece of the puzzle that you really should be deeply considerate of. Well, that's all from me. I hope you found this discussion about geospatial strategic thinking useful. If you'd like to think more about this, you can find us at sparkgeo.com. At this address, sparkgeo.com/resources, you'll find a PDF document with some further writings. We also write on Forbes. And I frequently tweet. So you can find me at geo_will on the Twitter sphere. I'd love to hear more about this. If you got any questions, I think we're about to do a question and answer session. I might be wearing a different hat.
Hello. I will. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great. Thanks for that really cool talk. I just wanted to start by saying a big thank you to you and SparkGeo for being one of our presenting partners. You were with us last year. You guys are on the committee as well for GeoIgnite. We wouldn't be able to do this without your support to do this sort of thing for the community. So it's great that you're able to do that. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure, John. These are important events, and kudos to you and your team for making it happen in complicated circumstances.
Yes, it's been interesting. Let's move to the Q&A portion of the event. We've got a first question here. It's from an anonymous attendee. It says, I'd like to know how decision-making process is in your organization. As you mentioned, the process is not slow in SparkGeo. Thank you.
I think decision making is really interesting. We're a small company, so I'll temper all my enthusiasm by saying it's easier to make decisions with fewer people. I've learned that from business. I've learned that from climbing. But with that in mind, what I have noticed about innovation and ideas is that it's worth having a 3-day rule on any new idea. You have an idea, you think it's amazing, let it sit in your head for 3 days and see if it starts rotting like a fish. Because that's a common occurrence, certainly for me. I think, oh, we should definitely do this, and I throw it on our internal Slack channel, and people probably think I'm stupid. And then in 3 days, I realize that they're right, and I am. So it's worth keeping those ideas in your head for a bit. In terms of internal decision making, again, small teams make the decisions more quickly. Having a strategy helps you make decisions sometimes without even having to verbalize them, because you know how certain things are going to roll. So again, think about strategy, think about your internal approach to things, think about what elements of a decision you can make intrinsically without even having to sort of pick up a phone and calling somebody. So that's how you go fast, is by having certain things already preconceived and pre-dealt with.
Good, thank you. So there's obviously the pandemic and everything that's going on has impacted everyone. Are there any projects that you could share with us? Have you been doing any work on COVID with clients? Anything related to that?
Yeah, we did our first COVID mapping. Gee whiz, back in March. But back when, previous to when it really had started in North America. In fact, it was before March. It was February. I remember sitting in a lounge in a hotel in San Francisco trying to get something to work there. It was all proof of concept work at that point. Now we have been engaging with a number of organizations, and we're helping them. Typically private sector stuff at the moment, so we can't really talk too much about it. But as you can imagine, large amounts of data. So we're sort of leveraging lots of GL technology to deliver that information. And yeah, although we haven't been doing it necessarily for any governments at this point, the private sector is also sort of deeply interested in what's happening in and around COVID, what the horizons look like, and when people can start kind of moving again, which is very interesting, and when people start sort of going back to work in a state of normality, which feels so far off right now, frankly.
Definitely does. Everybody's got to get used to a new normal, as it were. Eric Lubier, if in the keynote, mentioned the issue of data and kind of the overabundance. You talk about we've heard the term fire hose of information. You mentioned it in your own talk about sometimes giving people more data is actually giving them more issues to have to grapple with. How's SparkGeo able to help in situations like that? You moved quickly from talking about data to specific questions about change detection and things like that. How do you work in that area with clients?
Well, change in itself is a really interesting subject, because change is highly contextual. So when we start thinking about change, you need to know the context of change. Something that's easier to detect, certainly from an imagery perspective, but also in a kind of vector world, is this idea of an anomaly. So what is different here, or as opposed to what is the same, and then understanding anomalies over time. So there's a big question around the temporal element of a particular project. So if we think about some of our urbanization projects, we start thinking about things like measuring whether pixels are turning from green or brown into gray. It tells us that something's been urbanized in a very sort of rudimentary manner. So why did that happen? Over what kind of time period did it happen? Is it a reasonable thing? At which point is it, in air quotes, a change? Or if it just happens over a very long period of time, is it not actually a change? Is it just an evolution of some nature? So thinking about change is really important, and thinking about insight is really important, because insight is usually measured from some kind of algorithmic or business kind of metric. So we've got over some kind of threshold, therefore we want to publish an answer of some nature. So understanding what those thresholds are really important. This again goes back to that idea of making sure that you've got your algorithm being delivered in the correct pizza box. And that pizza box might be a series of business processes, business rules. It might be a series, it might be a particular interface, it might be a chart, it might be a report, it might be a map. Great, that's great. Then we can build a map for these people. But I don't think we have to sort of limit geospatial products to being solely delivered on maps. I think we should think about what is the best way to deliver a geospatial product to society at large. And I think that's a super important concept to get across.
Good. So we've got a question in the Q&A. How is, I think the question is probably better phrased, is SparkGeo planning to provide fast top-of-shelf maps in case of disasters such as this pandemic or wildfires or things like that?
SparkGeo is better tuned to create custom products. So clients come to us and ask us to build things for them. And those things might be fast maps pertaining to particular events. So we have done wildfire mapping and we have sort of built that into a service around wildfires. We've also done the same thing for urbanization, and we do the same thing for conceivably some elements of the pandemic. I wouldn't say we have a, in air quotes, pandemic map. I think we can build dashboards around certain things like human activity, human movement, which is in some way related to spread of COVID-19 and to some extent any kind of human transmittable disease. So I think that's going to become really interesting. But yeah, so SparkGeo as an organization, we're much better tuned to delivering custom services of that nature. So we listen hard to what clients are asking us to do, and we do our best to deliver on those things rather than sort of building necessarily sort of product-oriented sort of tools, if you like.
So thanks for that. We know in our attendees here today live that there's a lot of people from government. Is there anything you might share perspective on how you think maybe what you outlined in your presentation could be best utilized or leveraged? How do we get that thinking, that type of stuff into where it could help maybe at different levels of government?
I think it's so government is in a really interesting place. I think the Canadian government in general and BC in particular have done excellent work around open data. And I think the provision of data products by government is pivotal to a number of different areas of geospatial. And I point at the European Space Agency and the Sentinel programs, and say that they've done a wondrous job of creating an innovation community in Europe and elsewhere around the delivery of high quality scientific imagery data. I sat on a startup panel at the Geospatial World Forum last year. Was it last? It was last year.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, you were there too. Yeah. Back when we could fly places.
Yeah, when we could travel.
Yeah. And 6 out of 7 companies were based in some way or form on ESA data. And you think that's wild. That's an astonishing number of organizations that are innovating and building and creating value in the technology space from an open data product. So I think government can provide enormous value around that. And when I think about Sentinel, and I think about ESA, and I think about innovating companies, and I think about, RCM, that would be a really interesting opportunity because there isn't really an open radar product out there right now. Certainly not one with the promise of RCM. I think that would be an amazing place for Canada to support the Canadian geospatial, sort of technology space, if you like, to overuse a cliche. I think that would be a super powerful place for the Canadian government to operate, is opening up and making available some RCM data. I know they've done an amazing job at opening up RADARSat-1, which is super useful too. RCM is obviously a new platform, so we're going to be building new technology and innovating on new technology to detect change happening now. We need to be using sensors that are in the sky presently. So that would be a really cool place. Open data in general, I think, is where government has such an ability to change things and to provide sort of detailed, scientifically verifiable data products pertaining to landscape change and human activity. I think those things are absolutely pivotal.
Great. Well, Will, we've got a hard stop right now. I want to thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with the community, and for SparkGeo's support, and as well Anthony, who's been working with us on GeoIgnite on the first version of GeoIgnite, and now this, the new online version of GeoIgnite. So thank you very much, you and the team.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, John.
All right, everybody, we've got another short break, and we're going to be moving over to Business Geographics in this room. So hold on, we'll be back in a bit.